Hi, my name is Amanda Ignafo. I will be presenting my capstone assignment, fitness education presentation. Starting out, I'd like you to meet the client. The client is Tommy. He's a 32-year-old male who's active, currently working out 4 to 6 times per week, which includes strength training. In order to go through proper screening and assessment for the client, I did go through the PAR-Q as well as the health assessment, which helped me assess the cardiovascular risk of the client and determine whether or not it was appropriate to begin physical activity without clearance from a doctor first. Overall, these assessments showed that the client is in great standing health. The only consideration was that he is currently taking a prescription medication of Adderall, which is a stimulant, so it's important to consider that we will need to monitor heart rate and consider monitoring overtraining because sometimes stimulants can affect a client in a way that affects their perceived exertion, which can again lead to overtraining. So, because the client is in good standing health currently, I knew it was appropriate and okay to have a pretty good intensity for the workouts as the client's goals are currently strength based. His goals are to increase his hack squat by 50 pounds for 5 reps within the next week and in the next 8 weeks, and to increase his bench press by 20 pounds for 5 reps within the next 8 weeks. So, because these are both strength based goals, we were going to increase the intensity of his workouts a bit in order to help reach those goals. So, another screening tool that was used was the functional movement screening assessment. This consists of 7 different exercises that give a good overall picture of the client's current ability when it comes to functional movement and range of motion, flexibility, as well as their core stability, and really just a great overall picture. So, the client, since he is currently very active and in good health standing, he did score very well, with a score of 19, which was phenomenal. For the deep squat, this is something that was notable because there was lumbar flexion while going through the deep squat movement. Although he did have the flexibility and the range of motion needed, the lumbar flexion seemed to be happening because of a lack of core stability. Um, and another notable movement was the shoulder mobility test. So you'll see an image of that down here where he's completing that test. He did lack a little bit of shoulder mobility, scoring a 2 rather than a 3 here. So you see a lot of movement in the scapula during this assessment, which led me to know that we will be focusing on helping stabilize the scapula because there is a great range of motion that takes place during this. It's important to strengthen the serratus anterior as well as the lower trapezius, which help keep the scapula flush to the ribs and in a more safe position when going through different exercises. And another goal based on this assessment was to improve shoulder mobility overall so that he won't have to compensate with that extra scapular movement if he has that full range of motion in his shoulders already. And so moving on to the program design, the weaknesses that were found in the FMS screening were things that were all applied into the warm up for the client. So, starting with the warm up, we started with a jog in order to elevate his heart rate a bit and his overall body temperature. The jog for 5 minutes was appropriate for this client because they're already extremely active when it comes to cardiovascular exercise. So, this was a low to moderate intensity while completing the jog. Moving on to the exercises, we do have banded wall slides in order to help increase that range of motion with the shoulders overhead, as well as scat push-ups, which will help strengthen the serratus anterior. Prone Y raises were programmed in order to help strengthen that lower trapezius. And so all of those first parts of the warm-up are going to help with that shoulder stabilization and strengthening those muscles around the scapula. Moving into dead bugs, these were programmed so that we can help improve abdominal control. Since we did see that lumbar flexion, the more we can improve our abdominal control, the more control we're going to have over keeping a neutral spine. And we'll carry that abdominal control into the hinge drill as well. So now we're combining abdominal control with flexion of the hips and even the knees. So these were all programmed to be at the beginning of each workout so that the client is able to do them 4 times per week, and then also to give the client a better sense of their body awareness before moving into their heavier sets and working sets of the exercises, so that all of these movements can be applied to how they'll be moving throughout their program. So going into exercise selection, I was keeping in mind the client's specific goals when selecting exercises. The client's goals, again, were to increase their bench press and increase their hack squat from a strength standpoint. So because of that, both of these exercises were programmed in, as well as exercises to help address their weak points. So for the client's bench press, his sticking point was closer towards his lockout, which really relies more on triceps. So tricep exercises that were strength specific were programmed in order to help apply to the bench press as well. And then exercise selection was also chosen in a way to keep everything balanced. So making sure to strengthen both antagonist, agonist muscles and the stabilizers so that we can have muscular development as a whole that is balanced. So this is a concept that also comes from Hath and Triplett 2016, talking about developing balanced movements by moving through multiple planes. So especially as we come into our next day of our workout program, day 2, lower body, you'll see moving through a lot of different planes, especially when it comes to things like the goblet Cossack squats and the cable wood chops. So really applying those in that way. Focusing on exercise order and frequency. For exercise order, I leaned on information from Kramer and Ratasmus, 2004, that the multi-joint exercises come first, and then we move into the single joint exercises second. This is done in order to maximize strength and exercise technique. So as you'll see how things are programmed, the first 2 exercises programmed are the ones that are the most intense. They're multi-joint exercises. And then we go into more of those single joint exercises, which have a bit of a lower intensity and higher volume. Looking at exercise frequency, Schoenfield et al. 2016 had great guidelines for this, discussing that training each muscle group at least twice per week is optimal in order to produce better strength and muscle growth. So this is the reason that I chose to go with the upper body, lower body split, 4 days a week total, so that the client is able to train all the muscle groups twice per week. Looking at intensity and duration, Hath and Triplett 2016 show that the proper intensity for strength exercises is greater than or equal to 85% of the 1 rep max. That's why starting out week 1 for the strength exercises, here it would be both the dumbbell chest press and the dumbbell shoulder press. We are starting at 85%. As we go, we'll talk about how that will increase over time. And then for the rep range, we are at less than or equal to 6 reps. So that's why you'll see the 4 sets of 5 reps here and 2-minute rests in between. For the following exercises, they are a little bit more hypertrophy based. You'll see they fall into that range between 67 and 85% 1 rep max, as well as falling into the range of 6 to 12 reps. And the 30-second break. So here we're combining some strength exercises with some more hypertrophy-based exercises because the hypertrophy-based ones also contribute to improving strength on those main lifts like the bench press and the hack squat that we are working to increase. So that is the reason for programming that way. Moving on to the periodization scheme. So as I discussed right now, we are incorporating more of those hypertrophy-based exercises since we're having a client that is used to training in more of a hypertrophy way. We're introducing the strength exercises. So currently we are working with a 4-week block. of this format where we will have a linear progression of 2.5 to 5% weekly on all the exercises, keeping the current volume but increasing the weight and intensity used. On week 5, we will have a deload. And then moving back into that basic strength block after the deload, we're going to have higher intensity and moderate volume. So, starting to cut back on the volume a bit as the intensity continues to increase week to week. The next mesocycle that is planned is going to be a power block. So, looking at this from a 12-week perspective, we have 8 weeks of basic strength moving into 4 weeks of power. Looking at exercise techniques, these are some movements that the client did struggle with and need a little bit more review in order to really idealize the technique that they were using. So, with the lat pull down, things that were focused on were scapular depression, as well as stabilizing the shoulder joint with external rotation throughout the movement. So, a cue that was used for this was to bend the bar to help with external rotation and lat engagement, keeping the scapula in place while going throughout the movement. This really did help the client. Be able to be in more of a stable position where they were able to carry out the movement in a way that did not put their shoulders at risk of injury. So the deadlift was the lower body exercise that was focused on with technique. The main point here was correcting lumbar extension. So as we had talked about earlier in that FMS screening, the client did struggle with abdominal control in order to keep a neutral spine, and that did lead to some lumbar extension and the lockout of the deadlift. So focusing on that as well as stabilizing the hip joint with external rotation, so creating more torque at that ball and socket joint by externally rotating at the hip, the client was able to be in more of a stable position to set themselves up for success using their glutes and their abdomen and keeping a neutral spine. The cue for this that was used was screwing the feet into the floor. So the application for all that was learned throughout these last 7 weeks really do apply to my future career plans. My future career plans include expanding my own practice to hire other dietitians alongside myself, as well as other personal trainers, and expanding from there into an entire wellness center as time goes on. But all of these things really do apply to my future career plans because health assessment is extremely important, and having a standard for practitioners to go by during a health assessment is a great place to start. So the PAR-Q health assessment is something that in the past I knew existed, but I didn't apply to every personal training client that I had worked with. So this was a great reminder of the importance of going through the PAR-Q and the health assessment in order to make sure that this client is in a safe spot to start physical activity and really fully assess whether or not they need to be cleared by a doctor before beginning exercise, because our main goal is to keep the client safe before getting them involved in physical activity. So, this is something that I will absolutely implement to my future career plans, as well as the FMS assessment. I did find a lot of value in doing the FMS assessment because it was a bit more in depth with incorporating different movements that I typically wouldn't do for an initial fitness assessment. Um, Incorporating this as a baseline for all practitioners in my future career plans is something that I definitely plan to do. Periodization is another thing that really applies here because I've always considered periodization when it comes to programming for athletes or powerlifting clients and people who are currently competing in athletic sports. I always program in a way that prioritizes periodization and is very intentional about it. But in the past, I haven't always applied that to lifestyle clients. So, after going through this course and really diving into more of this, I've realized that I can apply periodization and some of these structures and progressions to lifestyle clients as well, and they would benefit from this. Moving on to faith integration, there were so many great scriptures that really applied to how we as practitioners can act in a way that can spread love the way that Jesus did. And at the end of the day, what matters the most is how we influence other people, how we can serve other people, and the impact we make on them. So, a great scripture to start with, I thought, was Philippians 2 3 through 4. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself, not looking to your own interest